our first summer scholar in residence. Who says that the pandemic will stop us from innovating and expanding our learning community at Orzarua during the summer? This is a wonderful, wonderful opportunity to connect around the scholarship of a friend of mine and a world-class scholar. And Dr. Ronnie Perelis is the Chief Rabbi, Dr. Isaac Abraham and Elena Alcazar Chair in Sephardic Studies and Associate Professor of Sephardic Studies. And he is at Yeshiva University. Dr. Perelis is the researcher who explores connections between Iberian and Jewish culture during the medieval and early modern periods. Essays on Sephardic history investigate the dynamics of religious transformation within the context of the crypto-Jewish experience. And I can tell you that we've had many an animated and wonderful and colorful Jewish conversation in the parks of Teaneck, where we first met more than a decade ago now, and heard some great Jewish music together downtown at the Public Theater. Dr. Perelis will be with us for 3 lectures, taking us through the time periods of when we had Jewish community in Spain and through the crisis of dangers to Jews in the Iberian Peninsula, Inquisition, and beyond in terms of crypto-Jewish experience. He will be presenting, here's how the format will work tonight. He'll be presenting and I'll be pinning his video so that you can see him speaking, and he'll be presenting for about an hour. If you have a question that comes up during that hour that you don't want to lose, you go down to the bottom of your screen, you press chat, and you write your question in the chat, please. Please keep yourself on mute so that we don't have any interruptions of our presentation tonight. If you have something come up during the middle of his presentation, please go down to the chat and write it into the chat. At about 8:30, I will ask Dr. Perelis a couple of questions and we'll be in dialogue. And then afterwards, we'll call on a few people, but we may not get to everyone. I really appreciate how many folks have responded and come to join us for tonight's presentation. It's wonderful that we're sharing this experience with our first summer scholar in residence. And again, I do ask you to mute yourselves and keep yourself on mute. Write into the chat any questions that come up during the presentation. And now, without further ado, Dr. Perelis, so glad you're with us. So glad.
So thank you. And as easy as this is to just go into this upstairs studio and begin this class, I really hope to have an opportunity to meet with you in the beautiful island of Manhattan, a place that I love dearly and that I miss very much. I live in Teaneck, so it's not far, but because I teach at Yeshiva University, I have the opportunity of being in Midtown at Stern College and Uptown at Yeshiva College and Revel. And it's just, missing the city, missing the energy. And I really look forward to a time that we could meet face to face and hear each other's voice and share a glass of tea and talk ideas and talk Torah and wonderful things. So inshallah, Mirza Hashem, mashallah, we should all be there, and I look forward to that. Okay. So with that out of the way, I'll say another piece of business, which is that throughout this talk tonight, I can talk forever about this stuff. I love it. It's been in my blood, for many years. But I try to be as interactive as possible. We'll be looking at primary sources together. Can I get a show of hands? I don't know if I can do a show of hands. A show of hands of how many of you got to read the Yerushalmi, just so I know. I'm not checking in. I'm just curious. Okay, I'm seeing just a few. Okay, fine. That's good. if you haven't had a chance, I'll just say this about Professor Yerushalmi's book. That's his first book. I think it's his first book. It's his first major book, at least. It's a gem. He was not only a pioneering investigator, but also a person who cared deeply about language and writing, and so it's you know, he's really one of, for me at least, you know, I look up to his historical writing as an ideal, as a model, and I encourage you. Unfortunately, that book, From Spanish Court to Italian Ghetto, is very expensive. I don't know why. I don't know. There would definitely be a demand for it. It's one of these strange things. But so that's what I would say about that chapter. If you did read the chapter, there, you know, many of my comments tonight will be clarified and I think deepened. But I think even after tonight, going back to that chapter, it may even be better. So I'll just say that about that secondary reading. And I just want to say another, you know, Hakarata Tov and real kavod for the Or Zarua community. I have never gone. I've been in a lot of places. I've been all over the United States. I've been to Mexico. I've been to Europe. Whenever I've been in Bate Knesset and in synagogues, they're very happy for me to speak, but no one ever asked me to send them extra reading. So I want to say you guys get the prize, and I think you know, you should really feel good about that, and it's a model to emulate. So you know, potrim bechvod achsanya, and I'm really happy to be with you guys tonight. So let's start without any further ado. I'm going to share a screen. I'm just going to put this to perfect. Okay. I just want to go to move this here. Oh, okay. Just give me 1 second for technical issues here. And why can't I get that down? I don't see. Okay. Slideshow. And ready. All right, everyone sees it, yeah? Did it come up, Brother Bolton? Oh,
Yes,
okay.
it did.
All right, so this is the, we're gonna start actually with the title of the series. Here you have it, the Galut Chelazel Livnei Yisrael Asher Kanaanim Ad Tzarfat. The Galut Yerushalayim Asher Bisfarad Yarshu et Arei HaNegev. So this is from a very tiny book of the Bible, the book of Obadiah. And we have the mention of 2 nations. We have Sarfat. Well, we have several nations, I should say, right? We have Bnei Israel. We have the Canaanim. We have the people who are all the way in Sarfat. And then we have a special group, which is our focus tonight, the Galut Yerushalayim, the exiles of Jerusalem, Asher Bisfarad, who are in this place called Sfarad. In the early translator of the Bible, Onkelos, answers what Sfarad is, and he tells us it's Aspamia. So Aspamia is an Aramaic version of Hispania, the Latin territory, the Latin name for the territory in the Roman Empire that will come to be known as Spain or the Iberian Peninsula. And so because of this interpretation by Onkelos, the Jews in Spain, the Jews who were living in Spain, referred to themselves as Sephardim. They said, oh, we live in this place called Sepharad. And the Jews in France called themselves people from Tzarfat. Although it's interesting that the Jews in France rarely refer to themselves that way. But the Jews in Spain do make a great deal of the fact that they are the Galut Yerushalayim Asher B'Sfarad. Now, I'm starting with this because so much of the identity and the sense of centrality, importance of the Jews of Spain stems from a view of themselves as being royal, as being descendants not just of any exiles, not just of any refugees, but a special group of refugees that came to Spain many, many generations before. And that's why they come back to this verse, Galut Yerushalayim, the exiles of Jerusalem. In other words, when Nebuchadnezzar came and destroyed Jerusalem, he sent out a special group of exiles far away, the elite, so that they wouldn't cause rebellions. And they sent them to a place that's so far away that's really the ends of the earth, right, to Spain. And so the Jews of Spain are descendants of these Jerusalemites, meaning the nobility, the Kohanim, right, the priests and the kings and the princes, but also that they've been in this land called Sepharad for a very, very long time. Now, another thing, you know, every place can be called by many names. You can call Manhattan, Manhattan, you can call it the city, you can call it New Amsterdam at some point, it was called that. You can call it the Big Apple, whatever you want. Same is true in Spain. So for Jews, it's Sepharad, or, you know, for modern Spaniards, it's España, which is a very modern term. It really only comes up as a unified name for the place after 1492 in a serious way. And for the Muslims who conquered in 711, it is Al-Andalus. And let's turn to a map for a second. Oh, sorry. So here we have a map of Spain, or there's really a map of the Mediterranean world, the wider Islamic world in the early medieval period. The southern part of Spain was called Andalusia by the natives, by the people who were living there before the Muslim conquest. Actually, Andalusia comes from the word the Vandals, because the Vandals were one of the marauding nations who came and overtook this Roman territory, and they settled in the south for some time. And so from Vandals, it turned into Andals, to Andalus. And the Muslims were mostly settled in the south. And so for them, the entire place became Al-Andalus. It is not an Arabic word, not in the least. It becomes Arabized, but it's not. So that's a little bit about those names. And I'm going to give a really brief background here. So Spain is part of the Roman Empire, integral part of the Roman Empire, right? You know, Seneca is from Spain, Emperor Hadrian's from Spain. There are Jews in Spain, certainly in Roman times, possibly even earlier, with Phoenicians and other traders. But it's a very small community, but it's a community. When the Roman Empire Christianizes, throughout the Roman Empire, things get pretty bad for Jews. And in Spain, it was no exception. And in fact, the Visigothic rulers, when they embraced Catholicism in the 5th century, 6th century, enacted in different, depending on the king, would enact different levels of persecution and restrictions on the Jews. And with eerie kind of echoes for the future, things like forced conversions and then forcing the converts to be second-class citizens, which is something we're going to see in our class today and a little bit next week. Okay, so that's our world. Now, when the Muslims break up, you know, when Islam conquers Arabia and then moves into the Middle East and goes eastward and westward, right? Muhammad dies in 632. By 711, the Muslims have conquered the Iberian Peninsula and all of that land. And they've also gone westward, almost to the Ganges. So we're dealing with an explosive expanse of military conquest that along with it brought all sorts of huge changes to the entire world and had huge repercussions for the Jews. anyone been here? I can't see. Does anyone know where we are? Right, Bolton, are you seeing people? Anyone raising their hands? So this is the Alhambra Palace in Granada. One of the great testaments to the flourishing of Islamic civilization. And also, as we're going to see, the respect that the Christian conquerors had for that culture, despite the fact of their hatred and desire to claim victory over the religion and over the political powers on the peninsula. But this is the Alhambra is this beautiful palace in Granada, and this is the Great Mosque of Cordoba, which today is a cathedral. But this was built during the Umayyad period in Spain. Again, just a wondrous testament to architecture and aesthetics, but also all the science that goes with it. Now, if you look at the arches here, and then you go here, this is a synagogue. This is the synagogue, which was during the riots that we're going to talk about later today in 1391, was turned into a church, which became known as Santa Maria la Blanca, Saint Mary the White. You can tell why it was called the White, because it's a very, very white, austere building. This is in Toledo, in the center of Spain. But again, to give a sense of the kind of the fruitful interaction between these different cultures, here you have the mosque, here's a shul, which was actually built during the Christian period under Christian kings. And you have all these evocations of very similar architectural styles and affinities there. That's for a whole other class, which at some point we can go back to. But I want to just give you a sense of, again, when they call themselves Sephardim, they're saying, we're really from here. This is our place. We are rooted here. This is part of our world. There's another image of the same synagogue. This is another synagogue about a 10-minute walk from that one. This was a private, if you can believe it, a private synagogue. This was the private chapel of Mayor Abulafia, who was the treasurer for Peter the Cruel, or Peter the Just, depending on if you were a friend or a foe. And this was a Christian king who was tainted as being known as the King of the Jews, because he had a lot of Jewish advisors. And this Jewish advisor built a synagogue, and you see the psukim up here, very much parallel to what you would find in a mosque in Spain, where you would have verses of the Quran. You also have them here. And every once in a while, there are verses in Arabic as well, interwoven. But if you look here, as you see where the arrow is, if you look very carefully, you'll see a shield with castle on it. And if I had time for another image, I'd show you an image of the same shield with a lion on it for the kingdom of Castile and Leon, the kingdom of his king. So here in this synagogue, this private synagogue, this Jew is very proud of the fact that he's rooted in this land. He's rooted also in this Arabized culture. Look at his last name, Abulafia, right? Even though he's living and working in completely Christian, Hispanized zone. But he is very proud of the fact that he is the treasure of the king, of the Christian king of Pedro. And so all these things are melding in this place. Now, this splendor is often short-lived. And that's, the bittersweet truth of history, and certainly the bittersweet truth of Jewish history. This Abulafia, who was, the Spitz, right? I mean, he was able to build this beautiful, huge synagogue in the center of town, and be honored by his king and all this. The king got paranoid, and the king thought he was stealing money from him and hiding it. And he arrested him and tortured him till he died waiting to hear where this pot of gold was. So here we have, everything at once, right? A person who's able to rise to very, very high stature and to lose it within seconds, or sadly, not seconds for him. Now, something else. Spain's not isolated from the wider world. I'll just give a little bit of a wider context. We go back to that map for a second. Most of the Jews at the time, we have a few Jews living up here in Germany, in France. We're dealing with very, very tiny communities. The fact that they produced what they produced is a testament to just amazing cultural creativity and focus, right? To think about that they produced Rashi, they produced the Bali Tosfot, they produced all those codes, but that's produced by a tiny group of Jews living here in France and Germany. But the majority of the Jews are living in Baghdad or in the Babylonian area. They're living in the land of Israel. They're living in Egypt, North Africa, and Spain, and Italy as well, of course. But when the Muslims take over the Babylonian area, right, the Persian Empire, this is a huge group of Jews. These were the people who produced the Babylonian Talmud. These were the Gaonim. All of a sudden, you have the Gaonim of Sura and Pumbedita and these places living out here along the Tigris-Euphrates in a place that's now taken over by the Muslims. And the center of power is shifted to Baghdad. The Abbasid Caliphate centers itself in Baghdad. And this creates a tremendous opportunity for the Gaonim to extend their reach, their Jewish knowledge, and their Jewish connections to the Jews of the wider diaspora. And that's why we have all these famous Gaonim in Baghdad. And that's why you never hear about the Gaonim that are living in Palestine, right? The Eretz Yisrael Gaonim get very little attention. We know about Sadia, we know about Amram, we know about Hai. Why is that? Power, right? Where is the power source? Where is everyone going to trade and spend a month of a Yarche Kala, right? Of a month after you do your selling of your goods, you can spend a month in Baghdad and sit and study Torah for a month. That's happening in Baghdad, right? And those people go back to their towns in Syria, in Palestine, in Egypt, in Persia, in North Africa. And guess what? When they have a really smart student, they're going to raise money to send them to Baghdad to study, right? And that gets radiated out. And Baghdad is this place with Jews, with Zoroastrians, with Christians, and they're all learning from each other. There's tons of translation happening, and from there it radiates out. And so while that's happening, Spain's a backwater. There's very few people there, Jews-wise. But then it starts to shift. By the time we get, let's go to our timeline here. By the time we get to Sadia, who's the apex of the Gaonim, it's already shifting to Cordoba. And Chazai ibn Shaprut, who's a great Jewish courtier, physician, supports learning. And then we get to the time of Shmuel Nagid and all the great poets. That'll be for another time. It's also to give you a little sense. But all these things have an end, right? As there's this fluorescence in Spain under the Muslims, the Christians start to assert themselves. 1085, the Christians retake Toledo, and that starts to shift things around. Maimonides flees his town of Cordoba, his hometown of Cordoba, where his family were 7 generations Dayanim, 7 generations of religious judges. And they have to run into exile. He goes east, and many Jews go north. By 1248, the major Christian conquest of the South has happened, and there's only Granada left. And this is the context that's important for us. As the Christians retake territory, I'm leaving us on this rather macabre image on purpose as I talk. As the Christians retake territory towards the south and retake retake territory for the Muslims, it's a very good opportunity for the Jews, despite the havoc and the chaos of war, because the Christians need someone to populate those There's been
Ronnie, there's a little microphone issue there.
Now?
Now you're good.
Sorry. How much did you lose? Just a little bit? Blip?
Just 2 sentences.
Okay, so I'll go back. So as the Christians are retaking territory, they take it town by town, right? It doesn't happen in one day. It doesn't happen in a month. The towns have been emptied. People leave, they run away. They give Jews special treatment and benefits to move into those towns and set up shop, start businesses, and settle those territories. Also the Jews, they're able to speak, they speak Arabic at the time. So, and they also speak Romance. They're the go-betweens between the Christians and their conquered. They serve this purpose under the Muslims also. So the Jews are this very important linchpin, this go-between translator, mediator status. This figure may be familiar to some of you. This is Santiago Matamoros, St. James the Moor Slayer. Mata Moros, kills Moors, kills Muslims. It's not a common name today, but it's also not a super uncommon name. You will find people in the Hispanic world who have the last name Matamoros. In fact, my family's from Cuba, and one of the great Cuban trios is the Trio Matamoros. And it, you know, I don't think most people ever thought twice about it. It's one of those things, you don't think about it. But that's the last name of someone who is a Moor slayer, someone who fights in those holy wars against the Muslims. And this is the patron saint of Spain, St. James, Santiago, right? The great city of Santiago in the north has this enormous Gothic cathedral. It is the #1 pilgrimage site for Catholics outside of Rome. And if you travel in the Latin American world, you will find many Santiagos, right? In Dominican Republic, in Cuba, in Chile, and other places. So St. James is a very, very important figure. And during the wars of conquest against the Muslims, St. James becomes the icon of the Reconquista. And you have him here riding the white horse, trampling the Muslims on the ground. You know they're Muslims because they have a curved sword and they're wearing headdresses. If you go to Granada, and I recommend going to the tomb of Ferdinand and Isabella. It's a little morbid, but you know, it's pretty interesting. And you will see festooned all around their very impressive tomb, images of this saint. Because for them, you know, who finished the reconquest of the peninsula, he was a very important symbol. This is coming from a Christian text, obviously. It's coming from the writings of Alfonso X. But here we have Muslims who have been conquered, going before the king, King of Aragon in the east of Spain. But it's not all conquest, or it's at least not all political military conquest. There's also a tremendous amount of cultural borrowing and translation that goes on. This is a book. This comes from a book called The Book of Games. It was translated from Arabic manuals on different games. And you see a Christian and a Muslim playing chess. And here's a little Arabic writing up there on top of the very nice tent that they have. And they're having a nice game of chess. So there's conquest, there's obvious bloodshed and terrible chaos, but there's also a lot of blending and taking from each other. And I think this is the greatest example of that strange sort of what a lot of historians call convivencia, of living together. That doesn't mean happiness. That doesn't mean peace and love. It means living together. And as many of us now during COVID know, that living together, even with people you love, can be difficult. But certainly the people who you think stole your religion, or who killed your God, or who, it's not so easy, right? But this comes from Ferdinand III, also known as the Saint, El Santo, who conquered the great cities of southern Muslim Spain, of Cordoba and Seville. And in his tomb in Seville, the Seville Cathedral is the largest cathedral in Europe until they built St. Paul's in Rome. And if that's not a statement, I don't know what is. So they demolished the Muslim mosque, right, obviously, and they built this enormous Gothic cathedral. And in it is buried the king who had this happen, had this constructed, and he wanted on his tombstone not only Latin, not only the vernacular Proto-Spanish of the time, but also, if you can see closely, Hebrew and Arabic. Because although he was, clearly a Catholic, he was a king for all his subjects. And so that was very important to him. And it's interesting that while the cathedral takes on this very, very Gothic, classic, it could look just like, Notre Dame, just a few minutes walk from the cathedral, you'll find the Alcazar of Seville, which is the palace which has been in longest continuous use in all of Europe. And that Alcazar palace, first of all, the name Alcazar, which becomes the name for palaces in Spain, is an Arabic word. But not only that until the 17th century, all of the reforms, all of the different expansions and updates to the Alcazar were done in the Islamic style. Because there was an appreciation for the beauty, and quite frankly, almost like the hedonism of it, these gorgeous, lush gardens and pleasure spaces. And in fact, Game of Thrones, I don't watch it, but I know that I've seen this thing where they talk about filming there. They use the Alcazar. They were the only people who were ever allowed to film there. They filmed in the Alcazar for one of their southern, more kind of tropical excursions. Okay, where do Jews fit in this? So they fit in the middle, and it's complicated. Officially, and this, again, we can talk about this for a long time, Jews in the medieval world can remain Jews under Christians, but their status has to be somewhat uncomfortable, right? And this goes back to Augustine, it goes back to early church fathers who make it very clear that you can't kill a Jew because they're Jewish. You can't rob them. You can't force them to convert, but you don't have to make their life nice. In fact, you have to make their life somewhat difficult, and you have to make it clear that they're second class. This is a law, and we'll spend a little bit of time on it. This is a law that comes from Alfonso X, who was this fascinating figure who was a really learned guy. He was known as the Wise, and he compiled a full compendium of laws for his kingdom. It was never accepted, never ratified, but it tells us a lot about the vision, at least, for what the kingdom should look like. So this is the laws regarding a synagogue. Would someone like to read it?
Got it.
Okay.
Legislation concerning the synagogue. Law 4. How Jews may have a synagogue among Christians. The synagogue is a place where Jews pray, and they may not construct anew a house such as this in any part of our kingdom without our permission. But those synagogues which they had previously, if they should fall into disrepair, may be restored or rebuilt in that same place where they stood originally, although they may not be enlarged, nor heightened, nor painted. And if the synagogue is constructed in any other way, it shall.
Okay, let me get to the next page. Is it there? Can you see it? Can you read it up there?
Shall that no Christian shall dare to destroy it, nor remove anything from it, nor take anything by force, unless a criminal seeks refuge therein. In this case, he may be removed forcibly and taken before the authorities. Furthermore, we mandate that Christians are forbidden to put animals in the synagogue, or to remain there themselves, or to disrupt the Jews while they are at prayer according to their law.
And thank you. Thank you for that. So, you know, we get a sense here, it's this in-between category. As long as they get permission, they can build a new synagogue. And we know they built plenty of new synagogues all over the place, but they have to get permission, right? But once they're built, Christians can't destroy them. They can't abuse them. They can't bother people. Something that was cut off, unfortunately, just from the way the screen is working right now, is a line that says, because it is a place where they call out to God. And it doesn't say their God. It doesn't say the God of the Jews. It says to God. And for me, that's also very important. I mean, there's an acknowledgement that, okay, we don't agree with these people. And in fact, the same king who writes this writes a very personal series of poems praising the Virgin Mary, wherein there are many, many stories of the Virgin Mary saving people from wicked Jews. So this is not a person who's free of anti-Semitic, stereotypes and tropes, but we see this kind of intermediary place. But the reason why I'm putting it here is to highlight the fact that Jews in Spain are rooted. Jews in Spain have rights. The kings and the Jews have a very strong relationship, and that serves them very, very well. And if anyone wants to study some little old Spanish, you can look here and see some interesting little tidbits. This is the edition prepared by Dwayne Carpenter from Boston College, a great Talmid Chacham and an amazing medievalist as well.
Dr. Perelis, what year is this from?
Okay, thank you. So this is 13th century. This is Alfonso X is the son of Fernando III. Fernando III died in the 1250s. So this is, like late 13th century. And it's really what it is kind of an ideal vision of like, okay, this is how things should work, right? And yeah. All right. Well, we're going to.
All right, you're a little bit muted again, so come closer or shift or something.
Are we back?
Yeah, you're back.
Okay, so now we're kind of ready. We've seen the mix, but it's been mostly very good and very, very positive, very non-lachrymose. And now we're going into the lachrymose period, which coexists often with some very nice things that are happening, but it's complicated. So let's take a look here. Our endpoint are a series of massive riots that happened in 1391. How do we get there? How do you get from a place where Jews are protected by the kings, where Jews have a firm place in the economic life, where Jews are an important part of the cultural life of Spain, where Jews, first of all, they live there for hundreds of years, and more Jews move there. How can we get from there to a explosion of violence against Jews that spread through the entire peninsula and can't be stopped for months in 1391? So nothing comes from the air. As the Jews are finding their way and settling themselves in medieval Spain, post-Reconquest Spain, right? The church now is refocusing itself, and its goal is to go outwards. There's a push to get new monastic orders, which will reach out, which will inspire people towards greater piety, which will help people in terms of acts of charity. But also there's a lot of interest in reaching out to the sad, poor fate of the infidels. What's going to happen to the souls of the Muslims and the Jews? So a place like Spain is the perfect frontier or battleground for that, because Spain has Muslims and Spain has a lot of Jews. And so we start to see an interest in the study of Arabic, in the study of Hebrew and Aramaic. And there's formal schools set up in Barcelona for this purpose. And people start to investigate the texts of Jews and Muslims to try to, first of all, understand them so they can convert Jews and Muslims better. But along the way, they find things that they don't like. And they start to argue that the authorities should confiscate Talmuds and they should limit Jewish practice and they should do all sorts of things. So we have a disputation in Paris in 1941. Sorry, is that bad? I'm hearing something weird. You all right? Is that okay? You're muted. Well, that was weird. That was an ugly sound. Are we all right?
Yeah.
You're good.
Hold
Okay,
on
good.
one second.
Sorry. So disputation,
let's-
the Paris Disputation, which ends with the burning of Talmuds in Paris, tremendous tragedy for Jewish learning. King João of Aragon, a person who actually had very good relations with Jews overall, concedes to the mendicant orders, allowing them to go in and give conversionary sermons. Stop for a second. Imagine yourself going to Or Zarua on a normal pre-COVID day, expecting to hear Rabbi Bolton teach a piece of Torah, and instead, a monk with his band of self-flagellating monks come into the synagogue and say, "Oh, no, we have a little something special for you today. We're going to tell you why you should embrace Jesus." So the same king who had good relations with Jews, had Jewish advisors, and the like, allowed this to happen, 1242. By 1263, there's the famous Barcelona Disputation. There's a great movie, I don't know about a great movie, but a very interesting movie about it called The Disputation. I recommend it. And that ends with apparently Nachmanides, Moshe ben Maimon, winning the debate against Pablo Cristiani, a Jew who turned Christian, but having to flee for his life because he won. So we see a climate of disputations, a climate of intellectual jousting between Christians and Jews, as depicted here. So that goes on for 100 years at least. And there's a few people who this affects. There are a few people who succumb, who think, oh, this is, maybe they're right. Maybe they're right. Some of them are high profile. Abner of Burgos, a brilliant physician and rabbi who embraces Christianity with all his might and dedicates the rest of his life to converting his fellow Jews. He writes several important volumes of polemics in Spanish and in Hebrew, reaching out to his fellow Jews, using only Jewish sources. So using Talmud, using Maimonides, referring to Kabbalah. I mean, it's an amazing effort. But again, he doesn't really get to many people. As time goes on, we get a few more people like Shlomo Halevi, who was a prominent rabbi and courtier in Burgos, one of the important northern cities, who embraces Christianity around 1391. And then his son also, and they both become archbishops. But these are minorities, and there's always people who convert. Paula Tartikoff, she's a great historian out at Rutgers. She studied some of these early conversions. And from what I've seen from her work, it seems that most of them are driven by either finances or social problems, trying to kind of get rid of a bad husband. It gets really easy when you turn Christian. The rabbis can't touch you and you don't need a get. So, this is the sort of thing. And it basically doesn't work, right? This intellectual stuff doesn't work directly. Jews stay Jewish. And actually that is part of the miracle of most of Jewish history. Not how many Jews left Judaism, but how many Jews stayed Jewish despite the odds? And you see that here. We get to larger social, political, economic, and cultural issues. 1369, we have this king, Peter the Cruel, that I mentioned earlier. Now, Peter the Cruel was taunted as king of the Jews. When he loses the civil war with his brother Enrique, Enrique installs plenty of Jewish courtiers around him, advisors, financiers. But the damage to Jews and the status of Jews and the has been done. We have disputation starting Castile 1370s. We have this guy, Ferdinand Martinez, who begins in 1378 to push the narrative of the fact that the intellectual attempt to convince Jews of the truth doesn't work, and what Jews will respond to, something that is said about many other subaltern groups and marginalized groups. The only thing they respect, the only thing they understand is violence. And he calls, starting in 1378, he's not the only one, calling for violent repression of Jews, of making life difficult for Jews, of not letting them have their beautiful synagogues, of forcing them into the bad neighborhoods in towns, of limiting their economic life. And think about it in terms of our own experience right now in COVID. What else is happening in the middle of the 14th century? The Black Plague. It hits everywhere, and it destabilizes, and it causes famine, and it causes disruptions. By the time we get to this, and it's really from this one person, although he wasn't alone, but he clearly was the spearhead, that we get to the riots of 1391. I'm showcasing this book. I think it's the best book focusing on the riots of 1391 by Professor Gampel from JTS. And it's a fruit of many years of research and careful research. He does a phenomenal job, really. And it's here in 1391 that there's a collapse. And this Ferdinand Martinez has been hitting the same note, but he's been restrained, he's been blocked, because there was a strong archbishop in Seville. Because
You're a little muffled.
king. What?
You were a little muzzled there, so come back.
Because he's a rabble rouser. He's a lower level priest, but he's a rabble rouser. But the hierarchy would have none of it and kept him in check. As long as there was a strong archbishop, he didn't get his way. As long as there was a strong king in Castile, he didn't get his way. But that has its limits. And the summer of 1391, amidst economic downturn, amidst the death of the archbishop, amidst the fact that the king of Castile was a minor of 8 years old, with no gravitas to be able to really control things, this Ferdinand Martinez starts a riot against the Jews of Seville, which doesn't end for an entire year almost. Months and months of rioting ensue throughout the entire peninsula. And what happens at the end is that, with the exception of the towns where there was a strong local leader that managed to stop the violence before it began and to protect his citizens, or not really citizens, but let's say his subjects, and to keep order, with those exceptions, and there were plenty of places where there was a strong local leader, whether it was a bishop or a local prince or local town council, that said, no, you go somewhere else, we're not gonna have you. Because the rioters moved from town to town. Scenes like this comes from the Sarajevo Haggadah of the 14th century. Scenes like this were disrupted, right? Jews in synagogue, studying, praying, rejoicing, having their world which was protected under Spanish Christian law, was destroyed, was disrupted. People were dragged to the baptismal font, forcibly converted, murdered. People ran away. Whole towns, places like Barcelona, which was a Ir ve'em b'Yisrael, a true, great congregation, is decimated. And after the dust settles, when the King of Aragon says, you must allow Jews back to Barcelona, the town council, which was very, very powerful and very independent, said, I'm sorry, we're done. We don't need the Jews anymore. We don't want the Jews anymore. And this is the economic piece here. In the 1200s, as the Reconquest is happening, the Jews are an essential go-between. By 100 years later, those wars are mostly done. And those cities are settled. And there are more and more Christians who are moving into the cities, moving into the same careers that the Jews had. Small finance, stores, things like that. You don't need the Jews in the same way. And so between the political vacuum, between the economic change, and between years and years of this much more aggressive, polemical approach to non-Christians by the church, you have kind of a bomb that explodes that spreads throughout the peninsula. And what's left is, the numbers are very hard to come by, but more or less people think about half of the Jews of Spain, which I should remind you was the largest Jewish community of the world. Half of the Jews of Spain have converted, anywhere from a third to half. What happens to the rest of them? What happens to the ones that didn't convert? What happens to one of the things that I'm deeply concerned with, what happens to those families where one brother ran away and maybe was hidden by a Christian friend or the bishop or the prince, and the other one didn't have time and he's converted? What happens to them? What happens to their family life? What happens, right? And we have documents like this, which is, very, very difficult to see, ketubot or wills, where a Jewish mother will give some things to her Christian children and something to her Jewish children, or Christians who converted, or Jews who converted, who are giving money to the synagogues in honor of their parents upon their death. So we have so-and-so who converted, giving money for Shemen Lema'or, B'yayin L'Kiddush L'Havdalah, in honor of their parents, who stayed Jewish, but they're already going to church. We're dealing with a very confusing time. What happens to the ones who converted? What are they? Are they Christians? Are they still somewhat Jewish? How many generations does it take till they become fully Christian? Can they ever really become fully Christian? These are all big questions that happen in the wake of 1391. I'm sorry. 1 second. Let's get back. I pressed something by mistake. I don't have my... okay, sorry. Let's get back. How are we doing on time? What time is it?
We're at 8:30, just about at 8:30.
Oh, okay. I'm having a lot of fun.
Feel free to go on a little bit more, and then we'll...
Okay, I'll go on a little bit more and get us to kind of a good place for next week.
Exactly.
Okay? My goal is that everything's self-standing, but they build on each other at the same time. So we'll always go back. Okay, I want to show you, this is a later document, but it tells you something of the confusion. This was identified and analyzed by Americo Castro, one of the great historians of Spanish history. And if you want to understand a little bit how Spaniards think about this time period, he's a great place to go. And a lot of his writings have been translated into English. So here's a guy who leaves Spain in 1492. But it didn't work out for him. He wasn't happy in exile. He wanted to go back home. He goes back home. He has to convert to Christianity. But upon his conversion and upon his return, he is inquired about, right? They want to find out about him. They interrogate him. And they say, you know, why would you leave Spain? Why would you, you know, why is Judaism so important to you? So would someone like to read this, what I think to be a brutally honest turning of the tables by Francisco de Cáceres here, the king, starting with If the King. Someone want to read that?
Well, I'm still paying attention, so I'll do it again.
Okay, great. Thank you.
If the king, our Lord, would command the Christians to become Jewish or otherwise leave his kingdom, some of them would become Jewish and others would leave. Those that would leave, finding themselves lost, would turn Jewish in order to return to their nature. And they would be Christians and would pray as Christians, and they would fool the world. They, the world, would think that they were Jewish, but on the inside, in their hearts and will, they would be Christians.
So here's this guy with a little bit of chutzpah left in him. And he says, what do you think? What do you think? Why do you think people would leave? Why do you think people come back? And what do you think they really are? Right? People, you're raised a certain way. You believe certain things from a very young age. It's powerful. It's a very powerful thing. You think you can just, you know, what would happen to you, Mr. Inquisitor, with your big cross? You know, the king one day says everyone has to become Jewish. You're going to start singing Hallel. You're going to start, well, maybe that's easy for them, but you know, you're going to just start putting on tefillin and talis and do everything and go to, you know, it's not, life is more complicated than this. You're no different. Don't be surprised. So, you know, for that first generation or whatever first generation of converts, especially because it was under such duress, many of them kept their Judaism in some form. So much so that there was a lot of anxiety about that. This is the cover of a little brochure that circulated in Spain in the midpoint of the 15th century. So think about it like this. 1391 is the big conversions. The first generation, you know, everything's muddied. But by the second generation, third generation, what are these people? Now, the fact is, most of them assimilate easily and strongly into Spanish Christian culture. But for many, they're somewhere in between. We're going to talk about why that is. But from the outside, and has a huge power here. From the outside, these people look and literally smell like Jews. A text that we'll look at maybe next week is from the great chronicler of the Catholic monarchs of Ferdinand and Isabella, Bernaldez, Andres de Bernaldez, that he talks about how the converts still were Jewish. And what's one of his proofs? They still enjoyed eating little dishes of foods, of vegetables fried in garlic, in olive oil and garlic, and that they didn't like eating ham. Can you imagine a theologian? This guy was a priest, right? He was a high-level priest. He's saying, oh, you can tell that the conversos were still Jewish because they liked little dishes of eggplant fried in olive oil with big pieces of garlic in it, right? Like tapas and, or salatim. That was the proof. That was the proof that these people really couldn't assimilate because the Judaism was so deep in them. But certainly, you know, to the outsider, I mean, it's just like kind of a crazy example, but to the outsider, these converts stayed to a great extent very Jewish. Now, that didn't mean that they were actually keeping Judaism. That was a minority, an important minority, a powerful minority, but that was a minority. But let's go back to that family, this theoretical family, which there aren't theoretical, it's not theoretical, there's so many of them, who, you know, your brother converted, You stay Jewish. You and your brother have a business together. You and your brother, let's say you import silk, not an uncommon Jewish profession, and not an uncommon converso profession afterwards, right? You have connections in the wider Middle East. You're willing to take the risk of bringing things in which could get lost and lose a lot of capital. This is a very common Jewish practice, but you want security. You want to have a family business. You want your daughter to marry someone else in this type of business. So you marry your daughter, you, the converso, marry your daughter to someone else in the silk business. Guess who else is in the silk business? Another converso. So you marry your daughter at a young age to another converso's son in order to keep that business going. Are you doing this to keep Judaism secret? In secret? Generally not. Generally, that's not what's happening from what we can tell. However, from the outside, you have people who continue to work in the same professions, live in the same neighborhoods, fraternize with their family that is still Jewish, and do things like marriage practices, which are very, very Jewish, despite the fact that they're getting married in a church and that they're maybe sending a son to a monastery or a daughter to a convent. So from the outside, these converts are not full converts. They are not full Christians. They are a monster. They are a hybrid. This little pamphlet was called the Alboraike, for the Al-Burak, the mystical steed of Muhammad. Now, why they chose that, it's a little strange. It's interesting because they're really talking about Jewish converts, and yet they choose this Islamic motif. And that's, I think, part of the inherited identity between Jews and Arabic culture, at least, if not Islamic culture. And so this pamphlet goes on to describe and to criticize and to make fun of, to ridicule. It also has a lot of humor. The practices of these bad conversos. And by the way, the reigning theory is that it was written by a converso to try to say, oh, they're good conversos and they're bad conversos. You've heard this with Jews, I'm sure, right? Around the same time that pamphlet comes out, there is a revolt in the city of Toledo. Toledo is in the center of the country, has one of the most important Jewish communities before 1391. That's where those beautiful synagogues were from. After the riots, they still had a very large Jewish community, but also a very large converso community. Once you're converted to Christianity, you no longer have limits on you. Right? You're not a Jew anymore. You can go into you can join a guild. You can have your son go into the priesthood. You could fight in a war, be loyal to the king in that way, get access to power that way. You could become a member of your town council. And after the first generation, this doesn't happen so much. By the second, third generation, by the 1450s, this is happening a lot. And you have people who see themselves as what is known as old Christians. Cristiano viejo, right? Old Christian, going to church and being given communion by a person whose parents were Jews, or whose grandparents were Jews. And even worse, maybe whose parents were arrested by the Inquisition for Judaizing. How can that be? How am I getting communion from this son of a Jew? How can it be that my town council is slightly majority converso? I know all of them. I know their parents and their grandparents. I will not listen to them. I can't abide that. And so there's a revolt against the fact that the town council tipped converso majority. And the riots that ensue are not against Jews. They're against conversos. So the Jews of Toledo at the time were spared the violence. It was the conversos who are attacked. And what is instituted in Toledo and repeated throughout the country over time, despite the critique of the church, despite the critique and the censure of the crown is what is known as limpieza de sangre, blood purity laws, saying if you are the descendant of a Muslim or a Jew, you are not allowed to hold certain positions of power. You're not allowed into certain guilds. You're not allowed in certain colleges or certain monasteries and other areas of power and opportunity. So they figure out a way to keep the Jews now who are converted from attaining power, from asserting themselves, and being uppity, if we'd like to use another term. Look at this. Libro de la Genealogía, a book of genealogy, and Limpieza de Sangre, por todas cuatro líneas, from all four sides, of Sir Antonio Martinez Zapatera, and he goes on with all his names, from his place, where he's from, where it was done. And look at the date at the bottom. Where is this coming from? When is this coming from? 1722. When are Jews kicked out of Spain? 1492. And yet, for hundreds of years, if you wanted to join a special club, if you wanted to get a certain position, you had to show that you were Jew-free. This is a deep mania. And the great authors of Spain, the great thinkers of Spain, Cervantes in particular, and many others, all talked about how insane this was. And yet it was the norm, because the anxiety about these conversos was so high. And this is where we're going to end with the Inquisition. And we'll continue on next week with the Inquisition. The Inquisition was founded before the Expulsion as a way of saying, we need to clarify. The crown felt it very important. The crown happened to have been pro-converso. The crown believed in conversion, believed in the power of baptism to convert people to become good Christians, and was against the constant critique of the conversos. It wasn't good for business, so to speak. It wasn't good for the kingdom to have all this hubbub and all this disorder around conversos. So they established the Inquisition as a way of policing the conversos and separating the good ones from the bad ones. At least that was what it was on paper. Every institution, once it's established, we know, gets into trouble. But on paper, this was the goal. This is why they did the investigations and the torture and the autos de fe and the burning at the stake, to separate the heretics from the good Christians. So you see the sword for justice and the olive branch for mercy. That was the self-understanding. But obviously we know that it's a lot more complicated and generally more sinister than that. But the end part of the 15th century is a time when you have these competing trends of, a push towards condemning the conversos, a push towards justifying the conversos. And what do you do with the real Jews? What do you do with the open Jews? And that's going to get us to the expulsion. And we'll start with that next week. So I'll stop here because it's getting late. And we'll do more next week. I'm very excited for your questions.
Great. Really great, Dr. Perelis.
Thank you.
If you could stop your screen share, we'll keep you on spot.
Yes, much better.
And
Thank you.
I'll just begin with thanking you so much for this in-depth covering a lot of ground there in lecture number 1. Let me ask you this to start off the round of questioning. When did an average Jewish person, and also take a more leadership-oriented Jewish person, when did they start to have some kind of inner turmoil and watchfulness about what was going on in the Iberian Peninsula? Was it when the Christians came back? Before that, was there any kind of real tension? We know about the Golden Age of Spain in our books of poetry in Ibn Gabirol and Ibn Ezra and Yehuda Halevi and the like. But when did the average soul, and did the average soul have this kind of worry and concern that this isn't exactly a place that's going to accept me for all of who I am and or the leadership?
That's a really great question. Part of the problem with history, is that like it's hindsight, so we can see the trends. One of the things that I find interesting is that at every turn, as the Jews are doing amazing, they're really amazing, we see the leaders or the people who write, let's put it like that, because that's who we have, right? Expressing real concern, real sense that this could all just change in a second. I think of Chazai ibn Shaprut, right at the beginning, right? This is the beginning of the Umayyad Caliphate in Spain. Cordoba is thriving. It's the richest place. People come, they're marveled. The Jews are doing amazing, economically, culturally. And Chazai ibn Shaprut writes a letter.
Give us a year.
I'm sorry. Chazai ibn Shaprut is, I believe, the
11th century.
Yeah, 11th century. Yeah. 10th century, 11th century. He writes a letter to the king of the Khazars. Now, it's unclear if the king of the Khazar gets the letter, if the response from the king of the Khazar is really coming from him, but he writes the letter. We have the copy of the letter he sends via someone who was going to the Byzantine Empire and would have access, theoretically, to go north up to the Khazars. Now, he heard of the Khazars, and he's dying to know about them. Here we have a kingdom of proud, powerful Jews. They have an army, they have a king, they don't get messed around. And he writes, Ani hakatan migalut Yerushalayim asher b'Sfarad. This is the most powerful Jew in the world. He's the richest Jew in the world. He's the one who has the most connections. He's the most cultured, right? And he says, Ani hakatan, I'm the smallest. Now part of it may be just rhetoric, but there's something very deep there. And because if you go throughout the letter, what does he say? He's like, thank God we're good here. The king treats us well. Things are good. But tell me about you. Tell me about your army. Tell me about your citizens. Tell me about your cities and your rivers and it's like, wow, there's a place where Jews can be proud and strong and don't get messed around. And the Khazars become this screen of Jewish, imagining of power and strength and dignity, that even some of the most powerful Jews, and I'll skip another Khazar obsessed Jew, Yehuda Levi. Yehuda Levi, who is 12th century. Again, he is a golden boy. Everything he does works, right? He's a guy from the north, the relatively uncultured Christian north, makes it down to Granada, gets noticed by Moshe ibn Ezra, the most accomplished person at the time, gets discovered, so to speak, for his poetry, becomes the hit of the town, becomes a doctor. He's a successful doctor. He moves around. He invests in business. He does great. Everything works out for him. And then he says, no, this is not going to last. I'm leaving. I'm out of here. Everything we're doing is wrong. Now, he's extreme. Right? I mean, he's extreme, like in what he does. He leaves Spain, he leaves it all behind, and it's well known and an amazing story. But like I see in these different moments, these figures who like have it really good and sense that at any moment it can all just fall apart, because it does often.
Interesting. Really?
Yeah, and then I'll just give another counterexample, which is a little bit different, which is Ibn Daud. Avram ibn Daud, who is around 11th century. So he's the first wave. I'm sorry, not 11th century. He's after the Almohad. So he's 12th century. So he along with many Jews had to leave the Muslim South because a group of fanatical Muslims came in and kicked everyone out and forcibly converted them. He moves to Toledo and he writes a book of history about his past, leading to the Jews of Spain. And he writes it because he wants his next generation to know where they came from. He understood that this is a time of transitions and that you need to have an acknowledgement of your past and the greatness of your past and understand your culture So I think throughout we have people doing something, but you know, what can you do about it really?
Right.
Besides be aware and keep your eyes open.
Well, I think you can, as you described, take on what I've seen referred to as becoming a cultural commuter. That perhaps the modern image of the Jewish citizen who can become a cultural commuter really is born here in a way that we have to really appreciate. Let me invite folks to raise their hand, hover over the bottom, and in the reactions, you know, sometimes it's used to clap and sometimes it's used to raise a hand. So you can go down, hover over the bottom where the little smiley face is for reactions. If you have a question, hit reactions and then put your hand up and I will recognize you so we can unmute you and have you ask your question. So go down to the bottom there, raise a hand, give a hand, and put it up, and then I will come to you. Anyone have a question to ask Dr. Perelis? Mark Ashley.
Hi.
There you go.
Hi, Professor, thank you very much. With the rise of the converso class, did it have any impact on halachic development in that part of the world?
Huge. It creates, you know, thank you for your question. Yeah, it creates huge issues. You know, in terms of status, Jewish status, I converted. My child converted, you know, or I converted, I have children. Are they Jewish? You know, if they show up in North Africa, for instance, and want to become Jews again, do they have to convert? For the most part, it's interesting. Partially because the conversos married among themselves, when they showed up to communities outside of Spain and wanted to embrace Judaism again, we don't have very many examples of the need for conversion. For instance, that's a very interesting like difference, you know, because they, again, this kind of almost tribal piece to their identity, that regardless of the fact that they were Christians maybe for several generations, their Jewish lineage was pretty clear. So that's one thing. Another area, you know, agunot and things like that. You have cases of a woman, she was married in Spain, they converted, or they were converts who converted. Converts who got married. And now the woman left and the man stayed behind. Is she married? Right? Is she married or is she considered an aguna that needs to get a divorce? These are really difficult questions that had to be dealt with. And we have a lot of response from rabbis in North Africa, from rabbis in the Middle East, you know, where Jews arrived after 1492 in big numbers. These are big questions. And then we have like interesting things. Let's say you have wine. Believe it or not, after the expulsion, there was still kosher wine being supervised in the south of Spain that was exported to the north of Africa. Okay, it's bizarre. I mean, I don't understand the mechanics of it, but it was happening. And the question is, if a converso is on the boat, can he vouch for the kashrut of the barrels and vouch for the fact that no one's tampering with the barrels? Is he better than a Jew? Is he worse than a Jew? Is he better? Maybe it's better to have a Christian do it than this guy. Professor Netanyahu Zichrono Livracha, the father of Bibi, was, you know, a great scholar of the Inquisition, and his main area, one of his main areas of research was into the response of what does it tell you about the status of the Jews. So, you know, if you're interested, you can see his work and the very, very vehement debates that it ensued, of course, because, you know, he has to be, his positions were pretty extreme, and but the research is fascinating, the analysis is fascinating. So
great. Dr. Fell,
Professor
Yeah.
Perelis, it was awesome lecture. Thanks so much. When I look at what happens to various cultures over time, the Muslims, when they needed money, you know, it was time to convert the Jews, you know, with the taxes to build their mosques and what have you. It would appear many cultures, it's a financially driven motivation. Everything is going good with the Jews when times are good, but when things hit the fan, then it's time to get rid of them. Can you lay some groundwork as to the financial or the economic motivation, perhaps at the time of the plague, that might have, you know, just caused this total collapse of relationships with the cultures?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. You know, every case is different, right? I mean, really, the local is the best way to go. The micro is always, you'll see it best in micro. But, you know, if we talk about 1391, part of the problem, and this has been talked about by historians, by political scientists. I mean, Hannah Arendt talks about this issue, for instance, that for most of Jewish history, Jews have a vertical relationship with power, right? They, you know, their status in the Christian world in particular, in the Islamic world, it was much more horizontal because Jews were not the only minority, which served us in a great ways, right? Most places in the Islamic world, Jews were minorities along with Christians or Zoroastrians or others, or Hindus. And so that kind of, we weren't the only other, right? But in the Christian world, in the Catholic world, let's be very clear, right? Till Luther, there's one show in town, and that show is the Catholic show. And they allow for this small group of Jews to show up and do their thing. And they're very useful to the top. They're useful to the bishops. They're useful to the kings and princes. And so Jews have this horizontal, vertical relationship with the king or whoever's in power, but they don't have a relationship with their neighbors. They don't have a very good relationship with their neighbors often, right? Their neighbors are a different entity, legally, economically, right? So this becomes a tension. This is fine while the cities are small, while the Christians are not very interested in doing things like trade, finance, things like this. But once, you know, one of the things we see is that after the Crusades, the Christians in Europe become very savvy, and they figure out complex financing. They're not so scared of leaving Christian countries. They go to the Mediterranean, they go around. And so the niche that Jews filled stops to be unique. And so, you know, they're in competition. But on top of that, their legal status in Christian societies is based on a relationship with the king. And so if the king is weak, the Jews' position will be very, very tenuous. And they're seen as competitors by their neighbors or overlords, right? People who are taking taxes from them and this and that, you know, in the countryside. So it's a very bad position to be in if the king ever loses power. And this is one of the reasons why traditionally, it's not necessarily, you know, it's just true. Jews have liked strong central leaders. And so, you know, this is kind of a long, you know, it's a longer trend of political theory, but this has its roots in the Christian world for that reason, right? Mm-hmm. Like you want a strong centralized power that can kind of protect your rights and not let the mob literally kill you, right?
It sounds like oftentimes where we associate the Crusades and then the expansion of Christian Spain, especially as they get now a land bridge down towards the North African coast, we associate that with religious expansionism and empire that way, but we forget the economic history. And I think what you've pointed out is that when they become interested in finance and they have networks of trade in the same kind of empire schematic that other empires used before them, really the competition starts and it drives them towards, you know, really being expressive of a lot of animosity towards Jewish neighbors. That's an excellent point about economic history. Any other questions? Richard, you have to unmute.
Yeah, sort of going along with Mark's question a bit. I'm just comparing the situation after the Enlightenment in my mind, that you have Jews immersed in another society with what's happening in Spain in this era. And what you wound up with in the Enlightenment is multiple shades of Judaism, that you had prominent people declaring this kind of Judaism is still Judaism, maybe better than the one we've been practicing. And it fits better, and we're more cohesive with the nation, et cetera, et cetera. That doesn't seem to be what's happening in Spain. You don't, or unless, are there writers, are there rabbis who are sort of take the position that, well, this practice is good. You know, a little ham on the side is okay. This kind of thing, or something like that. I'm being a little facetious, but how come that doesn't show up, or doesn't show up? We just don't hear about it.
I think because, you know, part of it is the religious sensibility of the wider culture, of the sense of like you're in or you're out, right? Much more. But it's the conversos that seem, we have examples of some conversos who are not happy. I mean, this is a tiny minority. This is an elite. These are people who are very, very cultured and very tortured. But they left us their writings. And we have some examples of these people who are saying, Yirmiyahu Yovel, who's a professor in Israel, wrote a great article on the Cancionero. The Cancionero it was like, in the early years of publishing, it was a published volume of popular verse. So imagine, you know, the top 40, you know, popular songs, they're published in this thing. A lot of the writers were conversos, okay? And he found all these very, very strongly Jewish content in a lot of their poems, but it's always in this kind of in between, never really happy sort of, you know, angst-filled way. And he argues and he shows from these poems, and again, this is a minority, but I'll just use it as just a fascinating counterexample of these people who say, let me be this and that. Why can't you let me be this and that? Why can't I be a Christian who doesn't eat ham? Because I promised my Zadie, okay? I promised my grandfather I won't eat ham, even though I'm a Christian. Why do you have to bother me? Just leave me be, right? Or, you know, and you see, first of all, the use of Hebrew words that are Hispanized in these poems. It's fascinating. You know, and all sorts of dirty jokes that are like him talking about all sorts of, you know, you know, weaving in Jewish content. Who are they writing this for? Who knows what a barahona is, right? I mean, it's a funny way of saying bracha, right? Who knows what a barahona is? It's very strange. Clearly, they have readers who aren't converso or Jewish, but it's interesting you have that kind of these people who are ill-fitting into the system. But what it seems to drive is people either towards a much more black and white world where either you're in or you're out, right? And we see after 1391 different trends, one of them being someone like Hasdai Kreskas, one of the great rabbis of the time of the riots, who spends years writing this master work of Hebrew, in Hebrew of Jewish philosophy, which really takes the entire tradition of Jewish philosophy, which was so important, right? Very Aristotelian Jewish philosophy, you know, which was epitomized by the Rambam, and critiques it and creates a new form of a still very philosophically oriented rational Judaism, but on new foundations, right? So kind of a renewal of the tradition, but in a very different way. And then you have people who embrace very strongly Kabbalah. And we know that the generation after the expulsion, Kabbalah just explodes. And it leads us to Lurianic Kabbalah and the spread of Kabbalistic knowledge with the exiles. You know, they get to places like Italy that has major printing houses. So, you know, not that Kabbalah is extremist, but Kabbalah is all-encompassing, right? It gives you an all-encompassing worldview. I don't think it's too hard to say that that is a product of the need to kind of revive your Judaism in a very strong way. So it's a great question. Like, I mean, part of the other thing, and I'll just, to answer your question, which is such a good question. If you notice, the Maskilim were obsessed to a great extent with the golden age of Spain. In fact, that whole term, that whole way of thinking about things can be, you know, linked back to the German intellectual Jews who wanted to find a model for their own life. So on some level, the Sephardic model didn't require you to be reformed because you were part of your world. You didn't live in a ghetto. Jews did not live in ghettos in Spain. Only till the very end, it was a last-ditch effort to try to separate Jews from conversos that they forced them into different neighborhoods. Jews were fully integrated, and yet they were Jews. It was clearly that they were Jews and they had their own ways of doing things, their own. But so you see, there's kind of the Sephardic model allows you to be very, very pious, but very, very worldly. And I think the Ashkenazim in Eastern Europe in particular had a different tension, that they wanted that and looked at that as like this ideal that is so exciting, you know. And so, yeah, I don't know if that.
Great. So we really appreciate that link between and that bridge between the age of Haskalah and the intellectual tradition, that it was a golden age, and perhaps because there are inklings of these modern trends, but not exactly. We heard from you tonight. Not exactly. And it was more complex than simply a black and white world. And yet there is a kind of othering going on within the Iberian Peninsula, and it grows and it grows and it grows. Yet it's kind of taken into this next period, the Inquisition, and we'll wonder whether or not someone can be a good converso, despite some eating eggplants and garlic in their homes. And we'll wait for your now explanations and erudition about that period the next time we meet, next Wednesday at 7:30 for the next installment of this wonderful series. Dr. Perelis, thank you so much. Thanks everyone for joining our series.
Thank you.
Really so much.
Together for this great learning.
And thank you.
Thank you very much. Very nice.
Thank
All
you.
right. Be well. We'll see each other next week. Okay.
Looking forward to it.
All right, see everybody. Take care.
Bye.
Good night. Good night.
Good night.
Ronnie, fantastic.
Thank you, Rabbi. Really.
So wonderful.
Good.
So wonderful. So rich and just a tapestry, a weave of all things that were, I think, in our minds as points of reference on the timeline, but that came together tonight in this introduction and then into the depth of some of the experience, as you said, to the micro, in addition to the macro.
That's great. It's good. So we'll continue with this. I think we're at a good place, actually, also, you know. Next week, maybe we can do a little bit. I don't know. It's a little hard with so many people to do the actual primary sources. Well, but to do longer form. Maybe we do breakout room. Would that work? Would people be into that? Or that's a little too complicated?
I think that we would like to highlight your erudition and listen to you tell us stories.
Excellent.
And, you
so
know.
I'll choose like smaller pieces just to give a little color. But yeah, we'll continue with. There's a lot more to do.
Yeah, I think that would be wonderful. And
okay.
If you want a couple of readers of primary sources like you found tonight, someone will unmute and do it, and I think that's a nice thing. But I do really believe the access that you have to the micro to get us back into the macro will really continue to, you know, be the compelling components of what we're doing.
Good. I think we touched a lot of important points tonight, and then we can just go deeper.
Absolutely.
Yeah, great questions.
Yeah,
nice.
we have a wonderful,
nice to be smart people. You know what I mean? To be honest, it's, you know,
smart people, interested people, literate Jewish people, and and with enough of the foundation that one small twist to reframe something allows them
to make these connections
to
and
make the connection and reframe in a way that is in step with some of what the latest look really is all about. This notion of cultural commutership of the Spaniards.
It's one of the things that I love about this stuff, because I look at them and it's just like, yeah, exactly, just that that shuttling.
I was reading the introduction to a study of Blacks and Jews that explores the pre-modern period, and was asking a lot of questions about how it was that some of the Spanish Jewish community could be involved in that international trade system. And of course, the question really is, how could, with a framework of morality like the Torah's narrative sets forth, could you have anyone be involved in pre-modern and into modern slave commerce?
Yeah.
And the author there made the argument that it was the Spanish cultural commutership that taught many Jews who were scattered globally about having to really make themselves camouflaged within the economic pursuits of their ages.
Interesting.
And countries. A very interesting take. I don't know if I can send you
the name. Do you know the name of the book? I'm curious.
I'll send you the author. Blacks and Jews in pre-modern times.
Oh wait, Shorish, Jonathan Shorish?
Yeah, I think it is Jonathan Shorish.
That's an amazing book. He's an amazing scholar. He's a good friend also.
Oh yeah.
I don't remember that he made that argument about the shuttling. Oh, I got to revisit it. Oh no, Jonathan was on my dissertation committee.
Oh really?
Yeah, he was like a young scholar then, and in fact, the only one who gave me a hard time.
Oh, I don't mean to bring up any kind of.
Oh no, he's a dear friend. He's a dear friend. Oh yeah, he's great. He's really great. That's really interesting.
Where is he from? Where is he?
So, I mean, his father is Ismar Shorish.
Oh, that's the Shorish of the seminary.
Yeah. By the way.
Oh.
Yeah. By the way, so he comes. It's Yichus, but he was at Columbia, and then he didn't get tenure, and he got a position in Potsdam, outside of Berlin. So he lives in between New York and Potsdam.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but he's in Riverdale a lot, he's a super talented guy, super talented. But that book is just like incredible.
It's a big, thick burgundy.
Yeah. Jews and Blacks in the early modern Atlantic world or something like that. Yeah. It's fabulous.
I never really.
Very important. Like he deals with some really tough issues. Really.
Those are really, really.
Really hard.
I'm reading it to steer in.
Right. And he's, it's interesting also from like a autobiographical point of view. It's like he's asking tough questions because like his politics are not friendly to slavery. He's a very committed, human rights person, and very committed and it's a hard question for him, but he doesn't do what a lot of scholars do, which is kind of airbrush it.
Right.
Or demonize it all, the Jews are the worst,
Correct. Right.
Yeah.
He's really giving it a great, honest treatment in such a real way.
Yeah. I'm going to have, hopefully, a conversation with a young scholar. His name is Stan Mervis. He's now at Arizona. He's a YU grad, and he did his PhD at CUNY. And he just came out with a book on Jamaica.
Oh yeah?
Century Jamaica. Yeah.
Cool.
He spent like 4 summers working in the archives in Kingston.
Wow.
Wills and marriage contracts and all sorts of stuff. So he's going to be talking about Jews in the slave trade. I had a bunch of students who asked me about it, and I'm going to have him on. I'll let you know when that's happening.
I would really appreciate being
Stan's great. Stan's really, really, he's a star. So I'll tell you, Stan was very close to Ellie Faber, who just passed away. I don't know if that name means anything. He was a professor, I think, at John Jay.
Right, right.
He wrote this really important book, like a corrective book to all the Farrakhan
Right.
acolyte garbage.
After the Jews and
Yeah.
Slave Trade came out in the 90s.
Right. And based on like serious, archival work, just to set the record straight. I think it's called that, something like Jews and the Slave Trade, setting the record straight, or something like that.
Exactly.
And,
Yeah, I have the book.
so Stan
He
was
just
very
died.
close to him. What?
He just died?
He just died. Yeah, I don't know if Corona. I don't know if he was sick, or I'm not sure. Stan was very close to him. I sadly had some nice interaction. You know, these people you meet and and you're like, oh, I want to keep up with them, and then you just don't. And it's just like,
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. That's between being so busy and between being men.
Yeah.
You know, not so easy. That's why one day I'm going to get a pool table and a dartboard and a bar at my Teaneck house that I still own.
Yes.
And we're just going to, have nights where we talk shop and we also throw a few darts. You got to have something to do as a bunch of guys.
Yeah. 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 And darts and beer really work together.
No, but it's so important to reach back out. And sometimes you take a cheshbon when someone's nifter and you say to yourself, you know what? I'm going to do it the next time. So if there's another soul in your life that you haven't reached out to, you just made a promise to live the legacy that you would really have wanted and he would have wanted.
Thank you. I'll take that.
Yeah. That's the bracha of thinking about it.
Yeah.
The day of it.
Amen.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
It's just so incredible for the summertime.
Good.
These worlds, and you are so compellingly engaging, even over Zoom. And I know that you began with the notion you have an invitation. I'll take you to dinner, and we'll get you over here, and we'll have you
great.
one day meet our folks. But, all right, until next week.
Thank you. We'll do it. Okay.
All best.
Thanks. This worked out great. Bye.
Bye. Toda.